Mason thought he had it all: a loving wife, a loyal best friend, and a second chance at life after beating a rare illness. But when he walks into his home for a surprise reunion, he finds his wife, Lily, in the arms of his best friend, Ethan. Heartbroken but determined, Mason channels his pain into a plan, not for revenge, but for justice. Will he reclaim his life, or will betrayal define his future? Mason Carter's boots crunched against the pine needles carpeting the trail in Olympic National Forest. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and cedar, as he led a group of hikers through a winding path near Port Angeles. At 32, Mason was in his element as a park ranger, his calm voice pointing out a bald eagle soaring above, his easy grin putting even the most nervous tourists at ease. This was his world: the forest, the open sky, and the quiet rhythm of a life he'd built with purpose. Today, Saturday, was no different. He wrapped up the tour, waved off the group, and checked his watch. Lily would be waiting at home, probably prepping for their evening ritual: a movie, a bowl of popcorn, and their dog, Scout, sprawled across the couch. Mason's life with Lily felt like a well-worn trail, familiar, reliable, and full of small joys. Married for 8 years, they'd settled into a rhythm that didn't need grand gestures. Lily, a 30-year-old third-grade teacher, was the spark to Mason's steady flame. Her classroom stories about kids' antics made him laugh, and her knack for turning mundane moments into memories, like their impromptu dance in the kitchen last week, kept their bond tight. They didn't have kids yet, but adoption papers were on the table, a shared dream they'd been sketching out over coffee. Their Port Angeles home was a hub for friends, especially Ethan, Mason's best friend since high school. Ethan, a local firefighter with a quick laugh and a knack for storytelling, was a regular at their barbecues, always ready with a beer and a bad joke. Last weekend, they'd hosted a game night, cheering over a Seahawks watch party. Ethan had teased Mason about his fantasy football picks, while Lily tossed popcorn at them both, her laughter filling the room. Moments like that made Mason feel grounded, like life was exactly where it should be. He trusted Lily completely, her late nights grading papers, her quick texts during the day. Ethan, too, was a brother in all but name. They played basketball every Saturday for years, sweating it out on the community court, trading stories about old high school pranks. Mason never questioned their loyalty. Why would he? They were his foundation. But today, something fell off. Halfway through a solo hike after his tour, Mason's arm tingled, a sharp prick that made him pause. He shook it off, blaming the chill in the air. Then came a wave of dizziness, his vision blurring as he gripped a tree for balance. His breath caught, shallow and quick, like he'd sprinted a mile. He crouched, heart pounding, and fumbled for his water bottle. Dehydration, he thought. Just need a second. But the feeling didn't pass. By the time he stumbled back to his truck, his hands were shaking. He called Lily, keeping his voice steady to avoid worrying her. "Hey, I'm feeling rough. Might have overdone it. Heading home." Lily was waiting when he pulled into the driveway, her eyes sharp with concern. "You look pale, Mason. What happened?" She pressed a hand to his forehead, her touch firm but gentle. He brushed it off with a weak smile, insisting it was nothing a nap wouldn't fix. But Lily wasn't having it. "We're going to the ER. Now." Her tone left no room for argument, and Mason, too tired to protest, nodded. The drive to the hospital was quiet, Scout's head resting on Mason's lap from the back seat. Lily's hand squeezed his, a silent promise that everything would be okay. At the hospital, the ER buzzed with controlled chaos, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps. A nurse, Ava, took Mason's vitals with a calm efficiency that put him at ease. Blood tests followed, then more waiting. Lily sat beside him, scrolling through her phone to distract herself, her thumb brushing his knuckles. Hours later, a doctor with a serious expression delivered the news. Mason's white blood cell counts were abnormal. They suspected a rare blood disorder, possibly leukemia. More tests were needed, but he'd have to stay for observation. The words hit like a punch. Mason stared at the floor, his mind racing. Lily's grip tightened, her voice cracking as she asked questions Mason couldn't process. "We'll figure this out," she said, her eyes wet but fierce. Together, the next morning, Mason was admitted for a longer stay. Chemotherapy loomed, along with daily monitoring. Lily took charge, packing a bag with his favorite books and a framed photo from their hiking trip to Hurricane Ridge. She taped it to the hospital wall, a snapshot of them grinning against a mountain backdrop. "So you don't forget what's waiting," she said, kissing his forehead. Ethan stopped by that afternoon, his usual swagger subdued. He clapped Mason's shoulder, promising to check in on Scout and the house. "You focus on kicking this thing's ass, man," he said, his voice thick. Mason nodded, grateful for the normalcy. Days blurred into a routine of 4 drips, blood draws, and restless nights. Lily was there every morning, bringing coffee and updates about her students. She posted on social media, rallying support. "Mason's fighting, and we're in this together." Hashtag Team Carter. Friends sent messages, and Ethan dropped off homemade chili, joking about his secret recipe. Mason clung to these moments, the small anchors keeping him steady. He didn't notice Lily's visits starting to shift, shorter, less frequent, her excuses about school meetings piling up. He didn't question Ethan's longer stays at the house, assuming he was helping with chores. Mason's world was the hospital now, a sterile bubble where trust was all he had. But trust, like a trail in a storm, can erode without warning. And Mason, focused on surviving, didn't see the cracks forming beneath his feet. Mason Carter lay in his hospital bed, the steady beep of the monitor marking time like a metronome. 3 weeks into his chemotherapy for a rare blood disorder, the days had blurred into a cycle of 4 drips, blood tests, and nausea that hit like clockwork. The Port Angeles hospital was now his world, a sterile cage where hope wrestled with exhaustion. Yet, Mason held fast to the anchors outside. Lily, his wife of 8 years, and Ethan, his best friend since high school. Their presence, even if sporadic, kept him grounded. But beneath the surface, something was shifting, and Mason, lost in his fight to survive, didn't see it coming. Lily had been a constant at first, arriving each morning with a thermos of coffee and stories about her third grader's latest antics. She'd sit by his bed, her hand resting on his, her voice a lifeline through the haze of treatment. She taped a photo of them hiking Hurricane Ridge to the wall, a reminder of the life waiting beyond these walls. Her social media posts were a beacon for friends. "Mason's a fighter, and we're in this together. Team Carter." But as the weeks dragged on, her visits grew shorter. She'd rush in after school, citing parent-teacher meetings or grading deadlines, her eyes darting to her phone more often. "Work's insane," she'd say, squeezing his hand before leaving. Mason nodded, grateful she was keeping their life together outside. He didn't question it. Why would he? Lily was his rock. Ethan, too, was a regular, stopping by with takeout or updates about Scout, their dog. As a firefighter, his schedule was unpredictable, but he'd swing by after shifts, cracking jokes to cut through the hospital's gloom. "Scout's hogging the couch, man," he'd say, grinning. "Gotta get you home to reclaim it." Mason laughed, the sound weak but genuine. Ethan's visits often overlapped with Lily's, the 3 of them sharing a moment that felt like old times. Barbecues, Seahawks games, late-night card sessions. But Mason didn't notice how Ethan lingered when Lily was there, his banter a touch too familiar, his glances too long. He didn't catch the way Lily's laugh softened when Ethan spoke, or how she'd check her phone after he left. Mason was too focused on the next blood draw, the next doctor's update. The hospital routine was grueling. Chemotherapy left Mason drained, his body aching from the inside out. Ava, the nurse who'd been with him since day one, was a quiet comfort. She'd check his vitals with steady hands, offering a smile or a quick word about the weather to ease the tension. One morning, as she adjusted his 4, she asked about his hikes in Olympic National Forest. Mason, surprised, shared a story about a bear sighting that had tourists scrambling. Ava listened, her calm presence a small reprieve. She didn't push, didn't pry, just let him talk. It was a brief escape from the sterile monotony. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, Lily's life was fraying in ways Mason couldn't see. She'd always been the organized one, juggling her teaching job with their plans to adopt. But Mason's diagnosis had upended everything. The fear of losing him gnawed at her, and the hospital visits, though she tried to stay strong, left her hollow. Ethan, ever the reliable friend, started showing up at their house more often, dropping off groceries, fixing a leaky faucet, or just sitting with her on the porch. "You don't have to do this alone," he'd say, his voice low and steady. Lily, overwhelmed, leaned into his support. One night, after a tearful call about Mason's latest test results, Ethan stayed late. They shared a bottle of wine, the conversation drifting from Mason's fight to their own fears. In a moment of weakness, Lily let Ethan's hand linger on hers. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't stopped either. Back at the hospital, Mason's condition showed small signs of progress. His white blood cell counts were stabilizing, and the doctors started mentioning the possibility of a shorter stay. He clung to that hope, texting Lily about their next hike, maybe to Lake Crescent. Her replies were warm but brief. "Can't wait. Love you." Mason didn't dwell on the brevity. He was too busy fighting the nausea, the fatigue, the fear that crept in during quiet moments. But there were signs, small, easily missed. Lily's visits dropped to every other day. She'd mention a staff meeting or a sick colleague she had to cover for. Ethan's drop-ins felt less spontaneous, more timed with Lily's presence. Once, Mason overheard them whispering in the hall, something about not now. He brushed it off as hospital stress, his trust in them unshaken. One evening, Ava noticed Mason staring at the photo on the wall. "That's a good one," she said, nodding at the Hurricane Ridge shot. "You two look happy." Mason smiled faintly. "Yeah, we are. She's holding it all together out there." Ava nodded, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Concern, maybe, or intuition. She didn't press, just handed him a cup of water and moved on. That night, Mason scrolled through Lily's social media on his phone. Her latest post was a selfie with Ethan at a coffee shop, captioned, "Grateful for friends who keep me sane. Hashtag Team Carter." The photo was innocent enough, but something about Ethan's arm around her shoulder made Mason pause. He shook it off, blaming the meds for his unease. The cracks were there, widening with every missed visit, every vague excuse. Lily was slipping, pulled by guilt and temptation. Ethan was crossing lines he'd never admit to. And Mason, fighting for his life, saw only the surface: love, loyalty, a future waiting. But the foundation was eroding, and the truth was closer than he knew. Mason Carter woke to the hum of the hospital monitor, his body aching but lighter than it had in weeks. The chemotherapy was working. His latest blood tests showed progress, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic. 5 weeks into his stay at the Port Angeles Hospital, fighting a rare blood disorder, Mason felt a spark of hope. The possibility of going home, of reclaiming his life with Lily, his wife, and their dog, Scout, was no longer a distant dream. He texted Lily the good news. "Doc say, I might be out soon. Miss you." Her reply came quickly, a heart emoji and "so proud of you." Mason smiled, picturing her face when he'd surprise her at home. The idea hit him during a quiet moment. He'd been planning it for days, ever since the doctor hinted at an early discharge. Mason wanted to walk into their Port Angeles house unannounced, roses in hand, and see Lily's eyes light up. He called his sister, Mia, who was visiting from Seattle, and shared the plan. "Don't tell Lily," he said, grinning through the fatigue. "I want it to be a surprise." Mia agreed, her voice warm with relief at his recovery. She'd drive him home in 2 days, after the final test confirmed he was stable. Mason spent the next hours daydreaming about their reunion. Lily running to him, Scout barking, the weight of the hospital fading like a bad dream. Ava, the nurse who'd been a steady presence through his treatment, noticed his mood shift. "You're looking hopeful today," she said, checking his chart. Mason nodded, sharing his plan to surprise Lily. Ava's smile was kind, but her eyes held a flicker of hesitation, gone before Mason could read it. She handed him a discharge checklist, her voice steady. "You're almost there, Mason. Keep it up." He thanked her, not noticing the way her gaze lingered, as if she sensed something he didn't. The morning of his discharge arrived, crisp and clear. Mason signed the paperwork, his hands steady despite the lingering weakness. Ava helped him gather his things, slipping a small note into his bag. "You've got this." "Ava." He didn't see it, too focused on the road ahead. Mia pulled up outside, and Mason climbed in her car, the bouquet of roses he'd ordered through her balanced on his lap. The drive from the hospital was quiet, the Olympic National Forest blurring past. Mason's heart raced with anticipation, his mind replaying the moment he'd walked through the door. He pictured Lily's laugh, her arms around him, the start of their next chapter. As they turned onto his street, Mason's excitement spiked. He asked Mia to wait in the car, wanting the moment to be his alone. "I'll call if I need you," he said, stepping out with the roses. The familiar sight of his house, where he and Lily had built 8 years of memories, felt like a lifeline. But then he saw it. Ethan's truck, parked sloppily at the curb, a few dry leaves stuck to the hood. Mason paused, brow furrowing. Ethan, his best friend, the firefighter who'd been by his side through high school and countless Saturday basketball games, didn't usually show up mid-morning. Maybe he was helping Lily with something. Mason thought, shaking off the unease. He trusted them both. No reason to doubt. He circled to the back door, the one they used after hikes, and found it unlocked. Perfect for his surprise. Mason stepped inside quietly, his boots soft on the floor, the roses clutched tightly. He wanted to catch Lily off guard, to see her face light up. A muffled laugh stopped him cold. It came from the living room, familiar but wrong, like a song played out of tune. He edged forward, leaning against the wall, his heart thudding. 2 more steps, and he could see into the room. The world stopped. Lily sat on the couch, her legs draped across Ethan's lap. His hand rested on her thigh, casual but intimate, their bodies pressed close. She laughed again, her head tilting toward his shoulder, his fingers brushing her arm. There was no mistaking it, no awkward misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. The roses slipped from Mason's hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Lily's head snapped up, her eyes locking on his. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening in a silent gasp. Ethan froze, his hand pulling back as if burned, his gaze darting to the floor. The silence was suffocating, stretching for seconds that felt like years. Mason stood rooted, his chest tight, not from the illness, but from a pain sharper than any needle. The life he'd clung to, Lily's promises, Ethan's loyalty, the future they'd planned, crumbled in that instant. Lily slid off the couch, her hands shaking. Mason, her voice broke, barely a whisper. Ethan said nothing, his shoulders hunched, avoiding Mason's eyes. The betrayal was clear, undeniable, a blade lodged in Mason's chest. He took a step forward, his voice low but steady. How long? Lily flinched, her eyes wet. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Mason's gaze shifted to Ethan, his best friend, the man who'd stood by him through every high and low. You? The word carried years of trust, now shattered. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it, his face a mask of guilt. Mason's hands clenched, not in a fist, but into something heavier, grief, not anger. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The truth was louder than any words. Mason Carter stood frozen in his Port Angeles living room, the fallen roses at his feet a silent testament to the life he thought he'd return to. The sight of his wife, Lily, entangled with his best friend, Ethan, burned into his mind, a betrayal that cut deeper than the blood disorder he'd just fought through 5 weeks of grueling chemotherapy. The hospital, the sterile walls, the endless tests, all faded against this raw wound. Lily's pale face and Ethan's averted gaze filled the suffocating silence. Mason's heart pounded, but his voice, when it came, was cold and deliberate. How long? He asked, eyes locked on Lily. She shrank back on the couch, her hands twisting together, her voice barely audible. A few weeks, she whispered, her eyes dropping to the floor. After you got sick. Mason's jaw tightened. He turned to Ethan, who still hadn't looked up. And you? My best friend? The words were sharp, heavy with years of trust now broken. Ethan mumbled something about it just happening, but Mason cut him off with a raised hand. Don't. Lily stood, taking a hesitant step toward him. Mason, I was scared. I thought you might not. Her voice cracked, tears spilling. Ethan was there, and I was so alone. Mason's eyes narrowed, his voice steady but laced with pain. Alone? I was fighting to live, Lily. You promised to be there. She flinched, her excuses dissolving under his gaze. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low. It wasn't planned, man. We didn't mean to hurt you. Mason's stare silenced him, a look that carried the weight of their shared history. Basketball games, late-night talks, a bond like brotherhood, now ashes. Get out, Mason said, his tone final. Both of you. Now. Lily's sob broke the air, but she didn't argue. Ethan grabbed his keys, his shoulders hunched, and headed for the door without a word. Lily lingered, her eyes pleading. Mason, please, let me explain. He stepped back, shaking his head. You replaced me while I was fighting to survive. There's nothing to explain. His words were a wall, unyielding. Lily's hand shook as she grabbed her purse and followed Ethan out, the door clicking shut behind them. Mason stood alone, the house eerily quiet. Scout, their dog, nudged his leg, whining softly. He sank onto the couch, the same spot where Lily and Ethan had been, and buried his face in his hands. The pain wasn't anger. It was deeper, a hollow ache that no hospital monitor could measure. His sister, Mia, still waiting in the car, knocked softly before entering. One look at Mason's face told her everything. "Oh, Mason," she said, sitting beside him. She didn't push for details, just stayed, her presence a quiet anchor. Hours later, Mason called a lawyer. Divorce was the only path forward. He didn't want revenge, nothing illegal or cruel, but he needed to sever the ties that bound him to Lily's betrayal. The lawyer, a calm woman named Sarah, outlined the process. Washington's no-fault divorce laws meant it would be straightforward, but Mason insisted on clear terms. Lily could take her belongings, but he wanted the house and Scout. It was his refuge, the one piece of his life still intact. Sarah nodded, promising to handle it cleanly. Word spread fast in their small Port Angeles circle. Friends texted Mason, shocked and sympathetic, but he kept his responses short. Ethan's colleagues at the fire station caught wind of the affair, and whispers turned to cold shoulders. His reputation, built on camaraderie, took a hit. Nobody trusted a guy who'd betray his best friend. Ethan avoided Mason, leaving voicemails Mason deleted unheard. Lily moved in with her brother, her teaching job strained by gossip among co-workers. She posted no more #Team Carter updates, her social media silent. Mason returned to the hospital for follow-up appointments, his recovery on track, but his spirit bruised. Ava, the nurse who'd been with him since day one, noticed the change immediately. During a routine check, she asked about Scout, keeping it light. Mason managed a half-smile, mentioning a walk they'd taken by the waterfront. Ava didn't pry, but her quiet attention felt like a lifeline. She'd seen him at his weakest, yet never pushed, never judged. When he left, she slipped him a coffee voucher for the hospital cafeteria. "On me," she said, her tone casual but kind. Days turned into weeks. Mason threw himself into routine. Walks with Scout, paperwork for the divorce, and short shift back at Olympic National Forest. The forest, with its towering cedars and open trails, was his escape. He didn't talk about Lily or Ethan, not even Mia. But the weight of their betrayal lingered, a shadow he couldn't outrun. One evening, over coffee with Mia, he admitted he didn't know how to trust again. "They were my world," he said, his voice low. "How do I start over?" Mia squeezed his hand. "You don't have to rush. Just keep moving." Lily, meanwhile, unraveled. Staying with her brother, she tried to hold on to Ethan, hoping their affair could mean something real. But Ethan pulled back, his texts vague, his visits rare. One night, she saw a message on his phone from a co-worker, hinting at another fling. When she confronted him, he shrugged, saying they'd never been official. The words stung, echoing her own betrayal of Mason. Alone, Lily faced the wreckage she'd caused, her guilt a constant companion. Mason chose a different path. He didn't lash out, didn't spread rumors. He let the divorce papers speak, let the silence between him and Ethan stand. The pain was there, sharp and unrelenting, but so was his resolve. He'd survived one battle in the hospital. This one, he'd fight with dignity. Mason Carter stepped onto the trail at Olympic National Forest, the crunch of gravel under his boots a familiar comfort. 3 months had passed since he walked in on his wife, Lily, and best friend, Ethan, shattering the life he'd fought to reclaim after a grueling battle with a rare blood disorder. The divorce was finalized. The house in Port Angeles is alone, and Scout, their dog, was his constant companion. The betrayal still stung, a quiet ache that surfaced in still moments. But Mason was moving forward step by deliberate step. He'd chosen dignity over vengeance, letting legal consequences and social fallout handle Lily and Ethan. Now he was learning to rebuild, not for them, but for himself. His follow-up appointments at the Port Angeles hospital were routine now, his health stable. Ava, the nurse who'd been a steady presence through his treatment, noticed a shift in him, not just physical recovery, but a deeper struggle. During one visit, as she checked his vitals, she asked about his latest ranger shift. Mason mentioned a group of kids he'd guided, their wide-eyed awe at a deer sighting. Ava smiled, her calm easing the tension he carried. Sounds like you're back where you belong, she said. Mason nodded, grateful for her knack for keeping things light. She didn't push, but her presence was a quiet constant, like the forest trails he loved. Outside the hospital, Mason's life was slowly taking shape. He returned to full-time ranger work, leading hikes and checking trails. The forest, with its towering cedars and open skies, was his refuge, a place where betrayal couldn't follow. He spent evenings with Scout, walking along the waterfront, the rhythm of waves steadying his thoughts. His sister, Mia, checked in often, bringing takeout or dragging him to a Seahawks game to keep him connected. Friends reached out, but Mason kept most at arm's length, not ready for their pity or questions. The pain of Lily and Ethan's affair lingered, but he refused to let it define him. Ava became an unexpected anchor. Their conversations, once confined to hospital visits, spilled into the cafeteria over coffee. She shared stories of her childhood on a farm, her night shifts, and the patients who had left a mark. Mason found himself opening up, not about the betrayal, but about smaller things, Scout's latest antics, a trail he'd rediscovered. One afternoon, Ava brought a book he'd mentioned, a guide to Pacific Northwest wildlife. "Thought you'd like this," she said, handing it over with a grin. Mason took it, surprised by the gesture, and wrote a note inside later. "Thanks for being there. M." He didn't give it to her, not yet, but kept it in his bag, a small step toward trust. Lily, meanwhile, was unraveling. Living with her brother, she tried to hold her teaching job, but the gossip followed her. Colleagues whispered, parents avoided her at school events, and the teacher's lounge grew quiet when she entered. Her attempt to cling to Ethan had collapsed. He'd moved on to a co-worker, confirming her fears of being used. One night, alone, she scrolled through old photos of her and Mason, the hashtag Team Carter posts now a painful reminder. Therapy became her lifeline, forcing her to face her choices. She'd mistaken loneliness for freedom, and the cost was everything. Her marriage, her friendships, her sense of self. She quit teaching, unable to bear the judgment, and enrolled in online courses, hoping to rebuild but unsure where to start. Ethan's life mirrored her collapse. After the affair leaked, his fire station colleagues distanced themselves, his reputation as one of the guys tarnished. He transferred to a station in another city, but rumors followed. A new fling with a co-worker ended in drama, his pattern of avoidance unchanged. He tried texting Mason once, a half-hearted apology, but got no reply. Mutual friends cut him off, their loyalty to Mason clear. Ethan's world, once loud with camaraderie, grew quiet, his choices a weight he couldn't outrun. Mason, by contrast, found balance in small moments. One evening, after a hospital visit, he and Ava walked to a nearby park. She'd finished her shift, and he'd lingered, their coffee chats now a habit. They sat on a bench, Scout sprawled at their feet, and talked about nothing important, her favorite hiking spot, his plans for a solo camping trip. The silence between them was easy, not heavy like the one that followed his discovery of Lily and Ethan. Ava didn't ask about his past, didn't push for more than he offered. Her presence was steady, a contrast to the chaos he'd survived. Weeks later, during a routine checkup, Mason handed Ava the book with his note inside. "Read it when you get a chance," he said, his voice casual, but his pulse quick. She smiled, tucking it into her bag, and promised she would. They didn't call it anything. No labels, no promises, just let it be. For Mason, it was enough. He wasn't erasing Lily or Ethan, wasn't pretending the pain didn't exist. But with Ava, he could breathe, could see a future that wasn't defined by loss. On a quiet afternoon, Mason led a group through the forest, pointing out a hawk circling above. A kid asked if it was lonely up there. Mason paused, then said, "Maybe, but it's free." The word stayed with him as he drove home, Scout's head out the window. He didn't need to control the future or unravel the past. The betrayal had broken him, but it hadn't buried him. With Ava's quiet support, the forest calm, and his own resilience, Mason was living again, not just surviving, but building something new, one steady step at a time.